Still to come, the riddle of Limerick's Soviet past. But first, we set our sights on O'Connell Street.
1922, and after a bloody war of independence and the signing of the treaty, the Irish Free State came into being. Yet despite an imminent civil war, our new nation needed an Irish identity. So the government began the process of nation building.
Flying a tricolour rather than a Union Jack was a political statement, but it had little impact on the everyday lives of citizens. To convince people that the change was real and permanent, Cosgrave's Cumann na Gael government had to find ways of changing everyday reality, and those changes couldn't cost much. Early and practical projects included a new currency, new postage stamps, and my own personal favourite is that they painted the post boxes green. They didn't change them, they didn't obliterate the royal symbols, they just painted them green. And there was another way to signal real change. All across the country, streets were renamed, and some of the clues still remain. Dr. Yvonne Whelan specialises in historical geography.
We're walking up here on Sackville Place, which was of course named after Lionel Cranfield Sackville, who was one of the Lord Lieutenants in Dublin in the early part of the 18th century. Towards the end of the 19th century, many of these street names began to be changed. So as we walk from Sackville Place onto O'Connell Street, we are of course stepping onto what was, in the 19th century, Sackville Street.
What was the reaction to the changing of the names?
Well, of course, there was a great deal of opposition, and many of the businesses, the residences, people like the Clearys, for example,
Yes.
on my right here, were up in arms about this street name change and didn't want it to go ahead. So in fact, they took the matter to court and they were granted an injunction, so Dublin Corporation weren't allowed to change the street name.
But when I look back at old pictures of Dublin, I mean, I see statues all over the place. What happened to the statues?
What happened to these monuments after 1922 is a really interesting story.
Was there a bit of freelance removal?
There certainly was, yes. King William II, for example, on College Green is destroyed in 1928 in an explosion. In the People's Gardens in the Phoenix Park, the Earl of Carlisle monument was destroyed in the 1950s, and today we're just left with the plinth and no monument.
And of course there's the famous one missing just beside us here.
Absolutely, yeah. We just need to go right to the centre of O'Connell Street, as it became known in 1924, and surrounding these various nationalist icons, you have Nelson sitting right in the centre of these.
On the 8th of March 1966, just before the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising, Lord Nelson, who had kept a colonial eye on Dublin for over 100 years, finally met his Waterloo. An early morning IRA bomb destroyed the upper half of the Dublin landmark, and 2 days later the Irish Army brought down the rest, and in doing so managed to cause a lot more damage than the IRA ever did. Nowadays, the fashion is for non-political public monuments like the Spire, but in the era of nation building, they were more interested in replacing icons of empire with homegrown heroes.
Well, this is the Cuchulainn Memorial, which was erected in 1935 on the 19th anniversary of the Easter Rising, commissioned by De Valera and his administration. He thought this was a very appropriate way of honouring and commemorating the memory of those who had died in the 1916 Rising.
I can understand De Valera's attraction for things mythological, but the Cumann na Gael government, I mean, they faced real concrete difficulties here. O'Connell Street was like Beirut.
It certainly was. You've got to remember that virtually both sides of O'Connell Street were in ruins largely. Many of the chief public buildings, the General Post Office, Custom House, the forecourts, all lay in ruins. So the government obviously had to say, well, what do we do with these? Do we rebuild these great public buildings? What plans do we come up with for the city?
By the end of the Civil War, much of Dublin city centre had been destroyed, so an international competition was held to rebuild it. The winning entry is kept at the City Archives in Pearse Street.
So this book that we're looking at here is actually Dublin of the Future, which was published in 1922.
Well, I've never heard of this book.
So this is the map where we can see some of the major metropolitan improvements that they were actually planning.
It looks to me like they actually wanted to move the city centre westward, like to around where Capel Street is today.
That's right. If you look here, for example, just to orientate ourselves, we've got the River Liffey running along here. Here's Sackville Street, now O'Connell Street, of course. So they were shifting the city further to the west developing a new traffic centre around this area, redeveloping, of course, the area, laying out new streets in this kind of radiating pattern. Here's his planned, almost Champs-Élysées-like development going out to the Phoenix Park. Yeah.
So how do these ambitious plans change things like the bridges across the Liffey?
If you have a look on this page here, you can see an interesting insight into what they planned, especially in relation to the Halfpenny Bridge and the area near Capel Street. There's an interesting quotation there that you might like to have a look at.
Replacement of the ignoble little metal bridge. That's kind of slightly
By one
pompous.
worthy of this important situation, quite.
So what happened to these plans after independence?
Well, the story after independence, we need to look to another set of plans, really, and we need to look to the Greater Dublin reconstruction movement. So if we just put Dublin of the future to one side for the moment and have a look at these proposals, the Greater Dublin reconstruction movement latched onto this idea of a highway, which they called a national highway, which would go from O'Connell Street, which you can see here, and would work its way across the city to the west, out to the Royal Hospital, where they would have their new parliamentary buildings in the Royal Hospital at Kilmainham.
It's a new boulevard complete with a massive new cathedral. I mean, it's where Temple Bar is today.
Almost
but
exactly,
it looks
yes,
huge.
it does. It completely dwarfs nearby Christ Church Cathedral.
And where was this going to be?
And this would be a new central station from Lower Abbey Street. So the General Post Office, formerly the Custom House, is here on the right.
Oh, I see, there's the bit of the Custom House.
Yes, so again, this idea of changing function becomes quite important.
I mean, this is all so forward-looking, so ambitious, so well thought out.
Yes, absolutely, especially I think in terms of transport, infrastructural developments, making this, I think, a city of the car, and traffic is at the heart of the city. Not necessarily the municipal buildings, they're important, because it's also about infrastructure, railways, stations, bus stations.
These visionary plans for a well laid out capital city with an integrated transport plan never made it past the drawing board. There just wasn't the money or the willpower. And every day Dubliners live with that reality. How different things might have been.
From Dublin, now